Okay. We are now recording. Welcome everyone to the Zoom reading of The Charity That Began at Home by Hankin, written in 1906, and this is being performed as part of Elmwood Playhouse's Public Domain Players. And I am Derek Tarson, the coordinator. I am going to be reading the stage directions and also playing General Bonsor. If everyone else can just introduce themselves.
I'm Debbie Buchsbaum, and I am playing Lady Denison.
I'm Polly Corman, and I'm playing Mrs. Eversley.
Okay, I'm Kevin Bislocki. I'm playing Basil Hilton.
Aha! Ha! I'm Carolyn.
Summers. I'm playing Hugh Veriker.
Are we going in order?
There is no order. So Carolyn, go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right, so I'm Carolyn, and I'm Mrs. Triggs.
B.
I'm B. Paul, and I'm Mrs. Horrocks.
Kathy.
I'm Kathy DiBiase, and I'm playing Anson.
Luana.
My name is Luana, and I'm playing Marjorie.
All right. I think that's everyone, right? All right. So let's begin. The Charity That Began at Home, Act 1, Scene, the drawing room at Friars, Ashton. Enter Lady Denison, a kindly, comfortable lady of about 48, followed by her daughter Marjorie, a very pretty girl of 22.
I don't think I'll go out again, Marjorie. The sun is rather hot and it tires my eyes. You go if you'd like.
I'd rather stay with you, Mother. The others will get on quite well without me for a little. Where will you sit?
Here, I think. Oh, I do hope they're enjoying themselves. Do you think they are?
I think so.
That's right. I wonder where I put my work.
Here it is. Shall I bring it?
Oh, thank you,
brings
dear.
2 wicker baskets from the table.
Thank you, dear. I knew I'd left it somewhere. I wish this strip was finished. I'm getting so tired of it.
She gets out a long strip of bright red woolen crochet.
Poor Mother. It'll soon be done now.
How are yours getting on?
She's begun on a bright blue strip.
Nearly finished. This is my last.
Oh, I've still 2 more to do.
I'll do one of them for you, Mother.
No, dear. I shall manage. But next time I shall give blankets.
But that wouldn't be the same as making something, would it?
Oh, that's why I should prefer it.
Lazy.
I'm so glad Mr. Hilton is coming down. He'll help us to entertain all these people.
Yes. Isn't it lucky he and Miss Triggs and Aunt Emily could all come by the same train? The carriage will only have to go to the station once.
I do hope Miss Triggs will like being here.
I think she will. Poor thing, her lodgings looked so dreadfully poor and uncomfortable when I went to see her. Here at least she'll have proper meals and feel she's among friends.
Where have you put her?
In the little room next mine. It's rather small, but the house is so full just now. I wanted to put her next Aunt Emily, but Aunt Emily always insists on having that room for the maid.
How long do you think she'll stay?
2 or 3 weeks, I hope. Long enough to give her a thorough rest and change.
Enter William left. Can I speak to you, my lady?
Certainly. What is it, William?
If you please, my lady, I should like to give notice.
Give notice, William?
Yes, miss.
Well, why now, William?
I'm very sorry, my lady, to have to give notice at all after being with your ladyship so many years.
Yes, but why give notice now? The proper time to give notice is surely 10 o'clock in the morning when I am seeing the housekeeper.
Very good, my lady.
Stop, William. Why do you want to give notice? You've always been a good servant. Have you found another situation?
No, miss, and I don't want to give notice. I hope you won't think that, miss.
Oh, then why do it, William?
Well, my lady, it's on account of Soames.
Soames?
Yes, miss. As long as Wilkins was here, things were better, but not but we had our quarrels in the servants' hall even then, on account of Thomas, you remember, miss.
I remember.
But with Soames, it's different, miss. Soames and I...
Have you spoken to the housekeeper?
Yes, m'lady, but Mrs. Meredith says she can do nothing. Soames is that violent, and his language quite awful when spoken to. So she said I'd better come to you, m'lady.
Oh, how very annoying of Mrs. Meredith.
Has Soames been using bad language to you, William?
Yes, miss. Not that I mind that, but there's other things. And in fact, him and me don't hit it off, so perhaps I'd better leave it a month, m'lady.
Nonsense, William. Why, you've been with us ever since you were a boy.
Yes, miss. I never thought to leave her ladyship so long as she was satisfied.
Very well. Mother is perfectly satisfied, and you must stay. And you must try and be patient with Soames. He has rather a bad temper with other servants, I know, but I'm sure he tries to conquer it. And you must help him, will you?
Very well, miss.
That's right. And then you'll see things will go better. Things always go better if only one tries to help people, don't they?
Yes, miss.
And I'll speak to Soames tomorrow morning.
Thank you, my lady. Thank you, miss.
And will you please send Anson to me, William?
Yes, my lady. He exits.
How troublesome servants are. I did think after Thomas went we should have no more quarreling, and now it Soames.
Well, of course we didn't engage Thomas because he was a good servant, did we? And now it's the same with Soames.
I suppose so. But it certainly makes helping people more difficult if they won't exercise a little self-control.
If they had more self-control, they wouldn't need help, would they, Mother dear?
I wonder if it would be a good thing to ask Mr. Hilton to speak to Soames.
Oh, yes, I'm sure it would. Mr. Hilton has such a wonderful influence with people.
Very well. I'll ask him this evening, if I remember.
Enter Anson, a smart maid dressed in black, pretty, but looking rather ill and frightened.
You sent for me, milady?
Yes, Anson. I want you to look at the mantle I wore this morning. The trimming has come unstitched.
Is that all, my lady?
Yes. I meant to tell you about it before luncheon. I thought I would speak about it now, while I remember.
Very good, milady.
Is anything the matter, Anson? You don't look well.
Nothing. Thank you, miss.
Would you like to see the doctor? We can easily send for him.
Oh, no, miss.
You're quite sure?
Quite. Thank you, miss. I'd much rather not have the doctor.
She exits.
I'm afraid something must be the matter with Anson. She's looked wretched lately, and she used to be so bright.
Oh, I dare say she's only bilious.
Enter from terrace Mrs. Horrocks, followed by Vereker.
Are you coming in, Mr. Vereker?
Yes, it's cooler here than on the terrace.
Marjorie, give Mrs. Horrocks a cushion. I hope you've had a pleasant afternoon.
Quite, thank you.
Mrs. Horrocks has had no end of a good time. She's been telling me the entire history of the Horrocks family from its remotest past. It appears the first of the Horrockses was a historian in the reign of Theodoric. His name was Orosius. Orosius Horrocks, you perceive. Transliteration by Grimm's Law.
How very interesting.
It was.
Have you left General Bonsoir in the garden?
No, he's just coming. He wants his tea. He's enjoyed himself, by the way. He's been telling Mr. Firkett a story about India for the last 2 hours. Poor Firkett. And it's going on still.
So I said to Finis was our senior major. Thorough sportsman he was. Shot a tiger as soon as you look at him. Got killed afterwards in the Sunderbans. Tiger ate him. Very sad. However, I said to Finis, my boy, if you don't keep that dashed commissar out of yours in order, you'll poison the whole cantonment. Finis laughed at that, saying, "You should have seen how he did laugh." Mrs. Horrocks rises impatiently, gets book from table in corner, and returns to sofa and pretends to be a mercer. So when the judge and I and Travers were dining with him a week or two later, I told you about Travers, didn't I? Would someone read, Kevin, would you just read for it, please?
No, I think not.
I must, or you won't understand the story. Travers was in the guides. He married, let me see, whom did he marry? I should remember in a moment.
Won't you sit down, Mr. Furkett? You look quite tired.
Thank you.
Blakesley, that was the name. She was a daughter of Earl Tom Blakesley of the police. But I never knew him. He was on the Bombay side. Travers died afterwards of enteric in Dunderkund, I think it was, or was it Chittagong? Yes, it was Chittagong, I remember, because I had such a fever there myself a year or two later. Well, to go back to fantasy.
Can you spare Mr. Furkett to me for a little, General? I want him to wind some wool for Mother.
Certainly.
Do you mind, Mr. Furkett? You did the last for her so well.
Oh, not at all, Miss Denison. On the contrary.
I call that real tact.
Hush.
What a lot of work you do, Lady Denison.
Yes, this is a crochet counterpane for old Mrs. Buckley. It's very ugly, isn't it? Marjorie and I each have to do 8 strips. Then we fasten them together, like this.
She puts the red and blue strips side by side.
Mrs. Buckley's 83 next week and almost blind. That's why Marjorie chose such bright colors, so that you might be able to see them, you know. Aren't they detestable?
There's my last finished. Sure you wouldn't like me to do one of yours, Mother?
No, thanks, dear. If I stopped doing this, I should only have to begin on Mrs. Jackson's stocking. I'll do my share.
All right. Then I can get on with something else.
I say, you're not going to begin another thing straight off.
Not begin. This is half done. It's a handkerchief case.
Is it for yourself?
No, it's for Mr. Hilton.
Ah, the man who's coming down this afternoon.
Yes, those are his initials.
B.H.?
Yes, his name's Basil. It's a pretty name, isn't it?
Why are you working him a handkerchief case?
I thought he'd like one.
Well, I'd like a handkerchief case. Why don't you work one for me?
Perhaps you don't deserve one.
I don't. But you said this morning, when one did things for people, one oughtn't to think of what they deserve, but what they want.
And you said, what rot.
Well, I've changed my mind. I think you're quite right, and I want a handkerchief case. My initials are H.V.
Isn't that rather a sudden conversation?
It's none the worse for that. Besides, now I come to think of it, I do deserve one. I played billiards with old Furkett this morning to please you.
To please him?
Oh, it didn't. I made 100 while he made 8. He simply hated it. Old Furkett's a perfect arse at billiards, though he says he can get me 30% off any kind of billiard table that's made.
Still, it was nice of you to play with him.
It was. I shan't do it again. And I think I ought to have a handkerchief case for doing it at all.
Very well. You shall have the next.
No, not the next. This one.
No, this is Mr. Hilton's. It's the first time he's been to stay with us. He works very hard while he's in London and scarcely ever gives himself a holiday. And I promised if he'd come and spend a fortnight with us this summer, I'd work him something. This is it.
The General, after mooning restlessly about upstage, is seated himself on the sofa by Mrs. Horrocks, who makes room for him on her right with obvious unwillingness. She goes on reading her book ostentatiously. I thought you had tea at 5, Lady Denison.
So we do, General. Is it 5 yet?
12 minutes past. 12 and a half.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I suppose they're waiting for the others. My sister-in-law, Mrs. Eversley, comes today, and Mr. Hilton and Miss Triggs. You've met my sister-in-law, I think?
Yes, I met her in Madrid when Eversley was at the embassy there. I was at Gibraltar.
Oh, he's at Vienna now. I wish he wasn't. It's such a long way off. We see simply nothing of them.
Not in London this season?
No, and my brother can't get away even now. So Emily is coming by herself. I do hope she's not going to be late.
She is late, but everybody's late nowadays. It's the family, and a doomed, deuced bad fashion or two. When I was in Alaga in '76.
Oh, I don't think it's her fault. Perhaps the train.
I've just said that the train's late, of course. That's the English railway system all over. The trains run anyhow, simply anyhow. Why, when I was at Alaga...
Oh, it may not be the train, General. Perhaps one of the horses. However, I don't think we'll wait any longer. Will you ring Mr. Verica?
You ought to have a motor, Lady Denison. Much more reliable than horses. I can get you 20% off any pattern you like to choose if you think of it.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Ferket. But I'm old-fashioned. I think I'll stick to horses.
Well, if you should change your mind, just apply to me, that's all.
I won't forget. Oh, bring tea, Soames. We won't wait for Mrs. Eversley.
Very good, my lady.
Yes, as I was saying, when I was at Alaga...
It might take 5 or 20% with some markers.
As I was saying, when I was at Alaga in '76. There now, I forgot what I wanted to say. Mrs. Horrocks closes her book angrily with a snap. The general starts and glares at her. But it will come back to me. Ever at Alaga, Verica, when you were in India?
For a few months.
What was your regiment, Mr. Verica?
Beastly place, I thought it.
What was your regiment, Mr. Verica?
I beg your pardon, Mrs. Horrocks. The Munsters.
Then you knew Toby Nicholson. He commands the Munsters, doesn't he?
Yes.
Why, I know Toby. First-rate chap. Knew him when he was a subaltern. I must write to the old beggar. Where are the Munsters now?
Shorncliffe, I believe.
Good. I'll write tonight, by Jove. I'd like to hear from Toby again. I've not seen him since we were at Poona together. Now, that reminds me of what I was going to tell you. When I was in Alaga in '76, we had a train from Gumti that was timed to arrive at Alaga at 6:38, just in time to change before dinner, don't you know? Well, that train was always late, always, by Jove. So I said to Macpherson, he was superintendent of the Gumti line, good chap, very good judge of a horse. Died of cholera, I remember, in '81. Oh, was it '82? Anyway, I said to him, Mac, my boy, I'll race or dash the little train from Bundy Bridge to the station. That's the last 3 miles into Alaga with my pony, a trap for 100 rupees. During this speech, Soames and William have brought in tea. A certain hostility is quite visible between them, but very discreetly shows.
Does everyone take cream?
Milk for me, please, and 1 lump of sugar.
2 lumps for me.
Well, old Mac wasn't at all pleased with that. He was awfully proud of his little one-horse line. It opened in '72, I remember. Pat Ellis was the traffic manager. Ellis had been...
Will you give that to Mr. Horrocks, Mr. Vrecker, and this to Mother?
Ellis had been...
You'll find some tea cake under the cover, Mrs. Horrocks.
As I was saying...
Thank you.
As I was saying... Ellis had been on the Bengal-Nagpur line before he came to Gumti. He was a son of old General Ellis, who was killed in the First Sikh War. He married...
Your tea, General?
In a moment. He married Nellie Tremaine, daughter of Tremaine of the 63rd. Tremaine had 4 daughters, I remember.
Will you cut that cake, Mr. Verica, and see if anybody would like some?
Kitty, the eldest, married Molyneux, who was afterwards commissioner of Varangiu, and one of his sons was gazetted the other day to the Shropshires. Another went into the Navy. Maud, the second girl, married Monty Robertson. He was a gunner. They lived in a little house outside Alaga, just where the road forks. One road leads to Balagai, and the other leads to... what's the name of that place at the Alaga Road? What's the name of the place that Alaga Road goes to, Verica?
I don't know. Alaga, I suppose?
No. Couplet, that's it, Couplet. There was one more daughter. I don't remember what became of her. No, there were only 3 of them, I recollect. It was Amelie who had 4 daughters, the 4 graces we used to call them, because there were 4 of them.
Some more tea, Mr. Firkett?
No.
Ainsley was superintendent of police and afterwards went to central India. But I was going to tell you about that race. Well, I took the trap. Enter Soames left.
Mrs. Eversley, Miss Triggs, Mr. Hilton.
Enter Mrs. Everleigh, Mrs. Triggs, and Mr. Hilton.
Oh, dear Emily, how are you? The general story was so interesting, I never heard the carriage. Oh, you know General Bonsoir, don't you? Oh, how do you do, Miss Triggs? How do you do, Mr. Hilton?
How do you do, Aunt Emily? I hope you've not had a tiring journey, Miss Triggs.
Oh, I must introduce you all. Now, Mrs. Horrocks, this is my sister-in-law, Mrs. Eversley, Miss Triggs, Mr. Hilton, General Bonsoir, Mr. Firkett, Mr. Vereker.
And now you'll all have some tea. You must be dying for it. Do you know you're dreadfully late?
I was just saying before you came in, Mrs. Eversley, the English railways are the most unpunctual in the world.
Indeed. I believe our train was before its time. But one of the horses got a stone in its shoe or something, and Hollings took about half an hour getting it out.
What did I tell you, Lady Denison? You much better have a motor.
Your tea, Aunt Emily? Cream and sugar, Miss Triggs?
No tea for me, thank you. I never drink tea unless it is fresh made.
Then I'll order some fresh for you. Mr. Vereker, will you ring?
Pray, don't trouble. I can do quite well without any tea.
It's no trouble.
Vereker rings.
Bread and butter, Aunt Emily?
Oh, you look dreadfully overworked, as usual, Mr. Hilton. You must have a complete rest while you're down here. Mr. Hilton works a great deal among the poor in London.
Indeed? Do you find that does any good?
Well, I hope so.
What kind of work do you do?
Oh, preaching and writing and so on.
Preaching? Are you a clergyman?
Mr. Hilton is the founder of the Church of Humanity.
Oh, not a real clergyman.
Enter Soames left with teapot on salver.
Some fresh tea, Soames?
Yes, miss.
He puts the new pot in place of the old, which he removes and exits.
Now you can have your tea, Miss Triggs.
Where is the Church of Humanity, Mr. Hilton? I don't think I've ever been in it.
Oh, the Church of Humanity is everywhere.
But the church, the building.
Oh, we have no building so far. I preach in halls and different places about London, which we hire.
I don't call that being somewhere. I call that being nowhere.
Well, in one sense, of course.
Give that to Aunt Emily, Mr. Vereker.
Are you one of the Norfolk Verekers? I met Sir Montague in London 2 seasons ago.
He's my uncle.
I remember he was very full of some experiments he was making with turnips to combat agricultural depression, I think.
As I dare say, Uncle Montague's always muddling around with that kind of thing.
It doesn't interest you, apparently.
Not in the least. But it amuses him.
Is he working at it still?
Probably. I've not seen him for the last 4 years.
What a lovely sunset! Come, all of you. We must go out and see it. Mrs. Horrocks, General, Aunt Emily, come!
Marjorie, Emily hasn't finished her tea yet, nor has Miss Triggs.
Thank you. I have quite done.
Come to the end of the terrace. You can't see it properly from here. Be quick or it'll be gone. come along.
All troop off save Lady Denison and Mrs. Eversley.
How did you leave Edward, Emily?
Very well, I think. He's had a lot of work to do lately, and that always seems to suit him. How have you been?
Oh, quite well, thanks.
Who are all these dreadful people you've got down here?
Oh, not dreadful, Emily.
Aren't they? I can hardly imagine a more dreadful visitor than General Bonsall. He's the greatest bore in London. Edward says he's nearly emptied 3 of the service clubs. I thought people had given up inviting him.
Oh, that's why we asked him.
I beg your pardon?
That's why we asked him. You see, he's getting an old man, and it seemed so unkind that nobody would have him to their houses. Of course, his stories are rather long, but I suppose he can't make them any shorter. So Marjorie thought if we asked him down for 10 days, he might enjoy it.
I think it very unlikely we shall enjoy it.
Oh, would you mind ringing while you're up, Emily? Then Soames can take away.
Who's that Miss Triggs?
Oh, she's a governess. She teaches German.
Is she going to teach you?
Oh, no, Emily. Marjorie did suggest it, but I refused. Miss Triggs is only here as a visitor.
I see.
Marjorie met her at the Harmons. She taught Cecily for a few weeks till they could find someone else. She's very poor, I'm afraid, and doesn't get many pupils. So Marjorie thought it would be kind to ask her to stay.
Enter
You can take away, Soames, and turn on the lights.
Yes, my lady.
He turns on the electric lights and removes the tea things.
Are all your visitors invited on this penitential system?
Oh, except you, Emily.
Except me, of course. That Mr. Furker, for instance.
Oh, a Furkett. He's something in the city. I'm not sure what, but nothing very prosperous, I'm afraid. He used to be a stockbroker, but he failed. And now he sells things on commission. I believe that's what it's called. He's always wanting to sell me a new billiard table or a bicycle or a sewing machine. Today it was a motor car. I shall have to buy something from him before he leaves, I know.
Where do you pick up these extraordinary people?
Oh, Marjorie found Mr. Furkett on the Underground Railway.
Where?
At South Kensington, I think. Oh, but maybe it was Slope Square. It was in a first-class carriage, and Mr. Furkett only had a third-class ticket. An inspector came round and wanted to take him up, so Marjorie paid his fare, and then, of course, they became friends.
Naturally.
He's been with us nearly a week. He goes on Monday.
I'm glad to hear it.
Mrs. Horrocks we met in a hotel in Mentone. The other people at the hotel would hardly speak to her. They were quite rude about it, which seemed very unkind, as she is only dull and rather vulgar, and she can't help that, can she? So Marjorie said we must be nice to her, and later on, when we were arranging whom to have down, we thought she should be asked.
Surely this is a rather new departure of yours, Muriel. You were always rather perfectly ridiculous about what you call being kind to people, but it never used to be as bad as this.
Oh, it's Mr. Hilton's idea. He calls it beginning one's charity at home. He wants everyone to do it.
How curious. He looks sane enough.
Oh, of course he's sane, Emily. Mr. Hilton is a very clever man. He writes books. I know they must be very clever, because I can so seldom understand them. But Marjorie does.
But why does Mr. Hilton think you should fill your house with wild beasts in this way? Is it for the good of their souls or of yours?
Oh, both, I think. It was in a sermon he preached on the true hospitality and the false. It was a beautiful sermon.
Which is this?
Oh, the true, of course. False hospitality is inviting people because you like them. True hospitality is inviting them because they'd like to be asked.
Ah, I wish you'd thought of mentioning in your letter that you were practicing true hospitality just now. Then I wouldn't have come.
Ah, now you're being worldly, Emily. And when people are worldly, it always makes me drop my stitches.
Why was Mr. Vereker invited, by the way? I suppose there's something shady about him as he's here.
I don't think so. Marjorie met him at a dance at Fitzallen's. His parents are both dead, and he's quarrelled with his uncle, and altogether seems rather alone in the world. So Marjorie thought he was quite a person to be asked.
Why did he quarrel with his uncle?
About his leaving the army, I think.
Why did he leave the army?
I don't know, Emily. I never asked. That's all we've got at present.
And quite enough, too. I hope they're all properly grateful.
Oh, they don't know. Of course, we wouldn't dream of telling them. It would spoil all their pleasure. They think they're asked here because we like them. If they didn't, they wouldn't enjoy it half as much. People do so love to feel as if they're wanted.
It must be an unusual sensation with the general. How long has Mr. Hilton been preaching in this absurd way?
He has been working among the poor for years, I believe, but it was only this season that people one knew began to go to him.
Does he make converts?
I suppose so. His services were crowded.
Indeed. I must remember to take Edward when we are next in London. Edward always enjoys a new religion.
Won't you talk to Mr. Hilton while he's down here?
I shall make a point of doing so. London is changing very much, Muriel. 20 years ago, everyone in society went to church, or at least pretended to do so. Nowadays, people seem to go anywhere.
Enter Marjorie, followed by Mrs. Horrocks and Miss Triggs.
It's been such a lovely sunset, Aunt Emily. You were lazy not to come out.
Your mother and I have been talking.
Can Miss Horrocks write a letter in your room, Mother? The General's in the library with Mr. Firkett, and that's rather disturbing.
Certainly. Will you turn on the lights, Marjorie? You'll find notepaper and things on my table, Mrs. Horrocks.
Thank you so much, Lady Denison.
Now I can show you your room, Miss Triggs. If you will come upstairs.
I'm afraid we have had to give you a very small room, Miss Triggs, but the house is so full just now.
Pray, don't apologize, Lady Denison. Of course, I know persons who are compelled to support themselves by teaching cannot expect to be treated with ceremony. Anything will do for me.
I assure you.
Not at all. I quite understand.
But really, Miss Triggs.
Please, do not trouble to say any more. Please, it is quite unnecessary. Shall we go, Miss Denison?
She stalks out, followed by Marjorie.
What an intolerable woman.
I do think she might have let me explain.
Explain? I should have packed her out of the house if I'd been in your place.
Oh, I don't think Mr. Hilton would approve of that.
Then Mr. Hilton should do his own entertaining. Why doesn't he have Miss Triggs to stay with him?
Emily, Mr. Hilton is a bachelor.
So I suppose. People with absurd theories about life usually are bachelors. But I don't think Miss Triggs would have come to any harm. She's excessively plain.
Really, Emily, what dreadful things you say. I don't think living in Vienna can be at all good for you.
What I can't understand is why, if you must be kind to people, which seems to me quite unnecessary, you shouldn't choose agreeable people instead of disagreeable ones.
I'm afraid I can't make it any clearer. But Mr. Hilton will tell you.
Hilton passes window.
Here he is.
Enter Hilton.
Mr. Hilton, will you kindly explain to Mrs. Eversley why I have to be kind to disagreeable people? I never can remember, and Marjorie isn't here.
My sister-in-law has been telling me about your peculiar doctrines, Mr. Hilton.
Oh, you see, Mrs. Eversley, agreeable people don't need friends to be kind to them. They have plenty already. Disagreeable people have not.
If people are disagreeable, then they don't deserve kindness.
Oh, it's not what people deserve, but what they want that matters, don't you think? In fact, often the less people deserve, the more we ought to help them. They need it more.
I'm afraid that's hardly a view you can expect me to take seriously, Mr. Hilton. It's very modern and original, but it's not serious.
I should hardly call it modern. Used we to be taught that it was our duty to love our enemies?
Yes, but only on Sundays, and no one ever dreamed of doing it. So of course that didn't matter. You want Lady Denison to do it.
Well, I certainly think the world would be a happier place and a better place if people helped each other because they needed help, irrespective of whether they deserved it or not.
That is certainly a convenient doctrine for your friend Miss Triggs.
What has my friend Miss Triggs been about? I never met her till this afternoon, by the way.
Still, it's on your principles that she was invited, and her manners are insufferable.
Oh, a little brusque, perhaps, but I dare say it's only shyness. She has never been here before, has she, Lady Denison?
No.
And lots of people are shy in a strange house, aren't they?
Her shyness certainly takes a singularly unpleasant form.
Well, we must just set to work to be kind to her and make her enjoy her visit, and in a week or two, she shall be a different woman. It's wonderful how a little kindness and goodwill softens people. Will you try?
Oh, no, Mr. Hilton. I'm not going to join the Church of Humanity, not even to change Miss Triggs, though I'm sure any change would be for the better.
Ah, we shall convert you yet. You'll see.
Enter Marjorie.
Is Miss Triggs better satisfied with her room now, Marjorie?
Yes, I think so. I've put her into mine.
What?
That's why I've been so long. I had to empty some of the drawers for her and move the bed.
Really, Marjorie?
What is it, Aunt Emily?
To turn out of your own bedroom merely to please an ill-tempered German governess? I've never heard of such a thing.
Poor Miss Triggs. I suppose she has rather a curious temper, but I dare say she can't help it.
Nonsense. She is a thoroughly ill-conditioned person.
Well, Aunt Emily, there's no use in being angry with her about it, is there? We must just be nice to her and try to make her stay pleasant, and then I dare say she'll be better.
So Mr. Hilton was good enough to suggest.
Then it's soon to be right. Mr. Hilton always knows how to manage people.
Well, after that handsome compliment, I think I'd better go upstairs. I have a letter or two to write before post. If it's not gone, Lady Denison.
No, the box isn't cleared till 7:15. Where have you put Mr. Hilton, Marjorie?
In the blue room, Mother. If you'll come, Mr. Hilton, I'll show you where it is.
Thank you.
Marjorie and Hilton exit.
Marjorie seems to have a great admiration for your Mr. Hilton, Muriel.
Yes, she thinks a great deal of him.
Is he staying here long?
For a fortnight, I hope.
Is that wise?
What do you mean, Emily?
It would be so tiresome if there were to be any foolish entanglement between him and Marjorie. Girls are so romantic about clergymen, and Mr. Hilton is a sort of clergyman, isn't he? Couldn't you send Marjorie away somewhere while he's here?
Oh, but I don't want to send Marjorie away. How am I to entertain Miss Triggs and Mrs. Horrocks without Marjorie?
Nonsense, Muriel. Do please understand that Marjorie's future is of more importance than entertaining Miss Triggs. If Mr. Hilton were in orders, it would be different. Edward might get someone to give him a living, though livings aren't what they were, of course. He might even become a bishop in time, or at least a dean. But as he's only some kind of dissenter, there's no use thinking of that. And if he were to propose to Marjorie while he was down here, it might give us a great deal of trouble.
But is Mr. Hilton going to propose to Marjorie? I've heard nothing about it.
And won't till it's too late. That kind of man has no proper feeling about these things. And of course he hasn't a sixpence.
Hasn't he, Emily? I thought he was quite well off.
What?
I thought he had quite a large income, only he gives it away. At least that's what Lady Wrexham told me. His place is close to theirs in Shropshire, but it's let just now.
My dear Muriel, why on earth didn't you say so before?
I didn't think you wanted to know about Mr. Hilton's income.
Not want to know? Of course I want to know. It makes all the difference. If Mr. Hilton is a rich man and has a place in Shropshire, it explains everything.
Explains what?
You're asking him here, and turning your house into a bear garden because he tells you to. Of course it flatters him. And it does no harm, for once. It's not as if you need know these people afterwards.
Emily!
I wonder what his income really is. I must find out from Lady Wrexham. It'll be a great thing to have Marjorie properly settled. I was always afraid you might have some difficulty in finding a really suitable husband for her. She's so very good, and men don't like that. It frightens them. Yes, dear, you've done quite right, and I think you've been very clever about it. I didn't know you had it in you.
Curtain. End of Act 1. Act 2. Scene is the same. Time morning a week later. Lady Denison discovered conning a German grammar.
Dear Bruder, des Bruders, dem Bruder, den Bruder, oh Bruder. Dear Bruder, des Bruder, den Bruder. No, that's wrong. Dear Bruder, des Bruder, dem Bruder, den Bruder, oh Bruder. Ah, what a language.
Enter Mrs. Eversley carrying half-finished letter.
Here you are, Muriel. I was just going to your room to find you.
Miss Triggs is in there writing letters.
Can you find a corner for me, too? When General Bonsor and Mrs. Horrocks are in the library together, I feel like Daniel in the den of lions. It's impossible to write letters under those conditions.
How tiresome. I hoped they would get on better after that scene in the drawing room last night.
I'm sure I don't know why. If you ask impossible people to stay, they may be civil to you, but they're perfectly certain to quarrel with each other. Mr. Hilton doesn't seem to have thought of that.
What are they quarreling about now? Was it about the peerage again?
Yes. Mrs. Horrocks, who really is the most vulgar person I've ever met, was explaining to Mr. Vereker that she could always tell whether a person was well-born or not the moment she set eyes on him. Good blood always told. Of course, this was meant for the General, whose father was a tailor in Regent Street, as everybody knows. The General took up the challenge at once and gravelled out that good birth was all rubbish and good blood came from eating good butcher's meat, not from being fifth cousin to a baronet. The reference was to Sir James Horrocks, who is Mrs. Horrocks' second cousin twice removed, as she's never tired of telling us. At that, Mrs. Horrocks flushed crimson and said the General was no gentleman. And then I came away.
Didn't Mr. Vereker manage to soothe them?
He didn't try. He seemed rather to enjoy the carnage.
I wonder if I ought to go. It'll interrupt my German dreadfully.
Your German?
Yes, I've had to learn German after all, to please Miss Triggs. She was getting restless at having nothing to do, and yesterday she said she really must be thinking of getting back to her work, which was absurd, of course, because no one wants to learn German in September. However, Marjorie said we ought to find her a pupil, just to keep her amused. So she's to teach me.
Why doesn't Marjorie learn?
Oh, Marjorie knows German already. Girls seem to know everything nowadays. Dear Bruder, des Bruders, dem Bruder.
Enter Mrs. Horrocks, furious.
Lady Denison, I really must ask you to request General Bonsor to moderate his language. I have never been treated with such disrespect in any house before.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mrs. Horrocks. What has the General been saying?
I couldn't possibly repeat it. but he has been entirely forgotten the courtesy that is due a lady, as I told him.
Was that wise? Oh, I should have thought it would only make the general worse.
It did. He became so violent that I felt to leave the room at once. General Bonsor ought to understand that this is not a barrack yard.
You must make allowances, Mrs. Horrocks. The general's temper is violent at times, but I don't think he can help it.
He ought to help it.
Still, he's an old man, and he's been in India. And when people have done that, we must make allowances for them on account of the climate. I hear it's trying, and we all have failings of some kind, haven't we?
I am not aware that I have failings.
Well, all the rest of us. Perhaps if you went back to him now, you would find him a little more cooler.
I shall certainly not do anything so rash. If I go out onto the terrace, do you think I shall be safe from his intrusion?
Oh, perhaps that would be best. You'll find chairs out there.
Exit Mrs. Horrocks.
I wonder how the general is now. Do you think I ought to send Marjorie to him?
Certainly not. Leave him to Mr. Vereker.
Mr. Vereker isn't always very successful with the general. He never seems to take him seriously, and the general hates that. But Marjorie can always manage him. Do you know where she is?
With Mr. Hilton, let's hope. Do leave her in peace.
Very well, Emily. Dear Bruder, des Bruders, dem Bruder, den Bruder, oh.
Enter Marjorie and Vereker.
Marjorie, will you please go to the library and see after the general? He's been quarreling with Mrs. Horrocks.
The general's not in the library now. We passed him a moment ago crossing the lawn.
I thought you were with Mr. Hilton, Marjorie.
Mr. Hilton's correcting proofs. I've been to the kitchen garden with Mr. Vereker to order the vegetables for luncheon.
I hardly think Mr. Vereker can have been of much assistance.
On the contrary, I was invaluable. I prevented Miss Denison from ordering peas and substituted beans. It's too late for peas. Besides, I prefer beans, and I insisted on peaches. The gardener hesitated, but I was firm.
Would you mind being quite quiet, all of you, for the next 10 minutes? Or I shall never know this declension in time for Miss Triggs. You might go back to the library, Emily, as the general has gone.
Well, perhaps I shall be less disturbed there. And you'd better go to the schoolroom and practice, Marjorie. You'll forget your music altogether if you aren't careful.
Very well, Aunt Emily.
Mrs. Everleigh's exits. Lady Denison seats herself upstage. Marjorie and Vereker come down.
Der Schwetter, der Schwetter, der Schwetter, die Schwetter, oh Schwetter. You won't mind my going on with my German, will you, Mr. Vereker? I really must get it done.
Not a bit. I like seeing other people work.
Then you can stay and watch Mother while I go and practice.
I'll come and watch you.
Oh, no. I never allow anyone to be with me when I practice, on account of wrong notes.
Well, don't practice then. Stay down here and talk.
And waste half the morning? Certainly not.
You needn't. You can work at my handkerchief case. You're taking an awful time over it.
What a shame. Why, I only began it 2 days ago, and it's half finished.
Is it? Let me see.
Look.
I say it is getting on.
Yes. There are the initials, H.V. Aren't they nice and sprawly?
I say it's really awfully nice of you to work it for me, Miss Denison.
But I like working things for people.
Not for everybody, though.
Oh, yes, if they want them. I'm making a whole lot of things for the Willis's Bazaar at Christmas.
Well, I hope you don't class me with a beastly bazaar.
It'll be a very nice bazaar. It's to pay off the debt on the parish room.
Miss Denison, don't you ever do anything to please yourself?
Of course I do. Lots of things.
Do you? I wish I could catch you at it.
What do you mean?
You seem to spend your whole time, looking after other people. All the morning you run around doing things for your mother.
I'm not running round now, am I?
No, because you're making me a handkerchief case. In the afternoon, if I ask you to come for a walk, you insist on taking Miss Triggs or that ridiculous old general because it wouldn't be kind not to ask them. I think that's the phrase. In the evening, you play bezique to amuse Mrs. Horrocks. Don't you occasionally do something to amuse yourself?
I don't know. I never thought about it.
That's just it. You've never thought about it. Well, I think it's not right. Nobody ought to be as unselfish as all that. It shows up the rest of us too much.
How absurd you are.
I am not absurd. Quite the contrary. I like everyone to give his mind to getting a good time for himself in this wicked world. Then I know where I am. Of course, I don't mind his doing someone else a good turn now and then, but he oughtn't to overdo it. You overdo it.
I'm ready for you now, Lady Denison.
Very well. I shall be in my room with Miss Triggs, Marjorie, if anyone wants me.
All right, Mother.
Dear Apfel, des Apfels, dem Apfel, den Apfel, oh Apfel.
Mr. Verka, why will you always pretend to be selfish and cynical? I'm sure you're not really.
Well, I don't know about cynical, but I'm unquestionably selfish. I have no illusion whatever around that.
Then why don't you try to improve?
I don't want to improve. I'm quite contented as I am.
Nobody can be that. We all have ideals of some kind.
Only for other people. And they're usually great nonsense. If people would only give up bothering about ideals and face facts, what a much happier world this would be for all of us.
But that would be dreadful. Think what the world would lose. Think of all the saints and the martyrs who laid down their lives for ideals.
And think what a lot of harm they did.
Mr. Verica, you can't mean that. You must feel sometimes how splendid it would be to do something heroic, to lay down your life for a great cause, to make the world better.
I don't want to make the world better. I think the world's all right as it is.
But you can't always feel like that. There must be times when you feel that the world is full of suffering and injustice, that it is not all right, but all wrong.
Oh, yes. When I'm not well, you mean?
No, I don't. Seriously?
Sometimes, perhaps, when I'm with you, for instance, I have a dim feeling that if we all put our backs into it, we might improve things. But I struggle against it.
Why struggle against it if you think it would make things better?
Because people who try to improve the world have a very uncomfortable time, Miss Denison. And I've a great dislike of being uncomfortable.
Mr. Verica!
Now you're shocked. But that's inevitable, I suppose. If one only knows enough about people, one always does disapprove of them.
Have you
finished your proofs, Mr. Hilton?
Oh, for this morning.
Then will you come here and bring Mr. Verica to a better frame of mind? His opinions are simply dreadful. If they are his opinions, you must convert him.
No. If I am to be converted, which I sincerely hope will not happen, I stipulate that it shall be by Miss Denison unaided. 2 to 1 isn't fair. I shall go, unless Hilton does.
You're running away.
Yes, to smoke.
What a curious man Mr. Verica is.
Is he?
Yes, he looks at things so strangely. I've never met anyone quite like him before.
In what way?
In what he thinks about life. If he does think it, he says he's selfish and isn't at all ashamed of it. He says ideals do more harm than good, and that he thinks the world would get along much better if only people would leave alone and not keep trying to improve it. Have you ever met someone who thought like that?
Oh, yes, it's a phrase many men pass through.
But they do pass through it. They don't stay like that. I mean, do they?
It depends. Some men seem as if they were born blind, like kittens. Soul blind, I mean. They have no perception at all of the spiritual side of things. Then one day, something opens the eyes of the soul, and for the first time, they see.
What kind of thing?
No, who can say? There are many ways in which a man's soul may be awakened. A word may do it sometimes, a line in a poem or a sentence in a book, or perhaps someone comes into his life, someone who is kind to him or loves him, and then the eyes of his soul are opened.
How wonderful!
Oh, yes, but terrible too. Perhaps no one comes, or the person who might have helped them is careless or indifferent, and then they may remain blind always.
But Mr. Verica and people like him only need someone to come and open their eyes?
Yes, Verica's quite a good fellow, I expect, underneath. He'll turn out all right if only he falls into good hands.
But if he falls into bad hands?
Then he may never make anything of his life. But it won't be because there was no good in him, only because no one came to bring it out.
I see.
It's astonishing what a lot of good there is in every man if you only look deep enough for it. Men seem selfish and heartless and indifferent on the surface, and all the while there's a soul in every one of them. I can give you hundreds of instances from my work among the very poor, cases of who seemed hopelessly brutish and degraded, doing kind things and generous things that would seem incredible if they were not true.
How splendid! But that was you, Mr. Hilton. You're such a wonderful influence with people. You must make Mr. Verica see.
Oh, he didn't seem very anxious to listen to me, Miss Denison. You might try what you can.
Enter Anson. She looks pale and her eyes are suspiciously red. She hesitates on seeing who is in the room.
I beg pardon, miss. I thought I might find her ladyship here.
Mother is in her room, Anson, but I think she's busy just now. Can I do anything?
No, thank you, miss. I wanted to speak to her ladyship.
You can see if she's engaged if you like.
Thank you, miss. Can I speak to you, milady?
Yes. Come in, Anson. What is it?
Exit Anson, closing the door.
Poor mother. I expect she was delighted to be interrupted. I know I was always when I was learning German.
Is that your mother's maid? She looks as if she were in trouble of some kind. Is anything the matter?
I don't know. She's not looked herself for some time. I asked her about it a week ago. I wanted her to see the doctor, but she wouldn't.
Has she been with you long?
4 years. I dare say it's nothing serious. Servants are so silly about what they eat, and then they wonder why they aren't well. Or she may have had some quarrel with one of our other servants. Do you find your servants quarrel among themselves, Mr. Hilton?
No. You see, I only keep one.
I sometimes wish we did. Only last week, William actually gave Mother notice just because he couldn't get on with one of the others. But Mother told you about that, didn't she?
No.
She meant to. I suppose she forgot.
We enter Anson, crying bitterly. She crosses stage rapidly and exits. Marjorie and Hilton look after her in amazement. Then enter Lady Denison, much frustrated.
Marjorie, will you go and find Aunt Emily for me? She's in the library, I think. I want her advice about something. And don't come back, dear, for a little.
Very well, Mother.
Exit Marjorie.
Perhaps I'd better stay.
No, please stay, Mr. Hilton. I shall want your advice, too.
Of course, if I can be of any use.
He reseats himself. Lady Denison sits also. Paul.
Why doesn't Emily come? She said she would be in the library. Surely Marjorie ought to have found her by this time. Ah, here she is. Emily, a dreadful thing has happened. I thought you would advise me.
Well, Muriel, what is it?
Anson, my maid. You remember Anson? She came to me from Lady Careberry.
Yes, I know. Well?
I was in my room doing my German. Fortunately, Miss Triggs had gone out into the garden for a few minutes while I was trying to learn the second declension. When Anson came in, she was evidently upset about something and looked ready to cry. In fact, she did cry. I asked her what was the matter, and she said she wanted to give notice. I was very much astonished because Anson has been with me for 4 years and has never given me notice before. So I asked her why, and she said that that she and Soames, well, in fact, that Soames had...
Muriel, if you are about to say what I suppose you are about to say, wouldn't it be better if Mr. Hilton...
Hilton rises again.
No, Emily, I asked Mr. Hilton particularly to remain. I shall want his advice about this. I shall want everybody's advice. Besides, it's partly his fault, for if it weren't for Mr. Hilton, I never should have engaged Soames.
I didn't know.
Oh, yes. Soames had a very bad character from his last place. In fact, no character at all, which is worse. He was with the Mathesons before he came to me, and Lady Frances gave him the most dreadful accounts of him when Marjorie was staying with her. She said the champagne had disappeared in the most remarkable manner, and as for his book, no one could make head or tail of it. I'm not sure there wasn't something about the plate, too. Anyhow, she sent him away without a character, as I said. And I always think it is so hard for a servant. Don't you, Emily?
To have no character, very.
Well, of course, he couldn't get another place, and Lady Frances got a letter from him while Marjorie was there, saying he was almost destitute. So Marjorie thought he ought to be given a second chance. Mr. Hilton is always saying people ought to be given another chance. Aren't you, Mr. Hilton? And as Lady Frances didn't seem willing to have him back, and Wilkins was leaving me just then on account of Thomas, I engaged him. I wish I hadn't now.
And now Soames is...
Yes, and I think it's most wicked of him. Anson has always been a good girl, and her mother is a most respectable woman. However, she is willing to forgive Anson and have her home, I'm glad to say, so that will be all right. She has no father, luckily.
Well, Muriel, this is what your new forms of philanthropy lead to.
Oh, it's very unfortunate, but it's done now. The question is, what are you to do?
Do? Dismiss Soames, of course. I'd better ring for him at once. I suppose we must let him give us his version of the affair before you discharge him.
I suppose so, but it's all very painful.
I'm extremely sorry, Lady Denison, if anything I have said has caused all this trouble, either to you or that poor girl. I never dreamed such a thing could occur.
Really? Then you must be singularly lacking in imagination, Mr. Hilton. It seems to me the logical outcome of your theories, when applied to domestic service.
Well, of course, there's a danger, but all reforms have an element of danger in them.
Then why reform?
But without reform, all progress would be impossible. The world would simply stagnate. We must risk something.
Well, I'd much rather not to have risked Anson. She was such an excellent maid.
Enter Soames.
Soames, are you there?
Soames is muted.
Pardon me, madam. Did you ring, my lady?
Yes. What is this, Soames, that Anson tells me about you?
What has she told you, my lady?
That while we were in London 3 months ago, within a month of your coming to me, in fact, you And now she's expecting a baby in the spring.
That is so, my lady.
Well, have you nothing else to say?
No, madam. Except, of course, that I'm very sorry this should have occurred.
Is that all?
I think that is all, my lady.
Well, of course you're prepared to make all the amends in your power to poor Anson.
Of course, my lady.
Very well, then. You must marry her.
I'm afraid I can't do that, my lady.
There, Mr. Hilton.
Nonsense, Soames. You will be acting very wickedly if you do anything else. Anson is a good girl, a very good girl, and she is the best maid I ever had, and I'm very sorry to part with her. But you've brought all this disgrace on her, poor thing, and you must certainly marry her.
I beg your pardon, my lady. I should be perfectly willing to marry Anson. She seems a very respectable young woman, as you say. Unfortunately, I am already married.
What?
I have a wife already, madam, I am sorry to say.
Really? This is most unlucky. Mr. Hilton, can you suggest anything?
Well, as things stand, I'm afraid there's nothing to suggest. We must do our best for this poor girl, of course, and Soames must help us in any way he can. That's all that I can think of.
Anything Lady Denison thinks is right. Sir, I shall be happy to fall in.
Very well. That will do, Soames.
Thank you, my lady.
He exits.
Poor Anson. I am really dreadfully sorry for her. It's such a terrible thing to happen to a girl.
If any other of your converts are engaging their servants on philanthropic lines, Mr. Hilton, you had better caution them to choose single men.
Oh, James, I'm glad to say, is unmarried.
James?
The boy who helps in the garden. But then he's only 16.
Of course, Soames must be sent away.
I suppose so.
Even Mr. Hilton must see that.
I'm not sure.
Not sure? After this disgraceful affair?
I am thinking of the future, Mrs. Eversley, not of the past. I'm very sorry for what has happened to poor Anson, sorrier than I can say. But that can't be altered now. What past is past. The question is, how are we to help Soames?
But we don't want to help Soames. Soames has behaved abominably.
Well, that's no reason not helping him, is it?
It certainly seems so to me.
Oh, surely not. Surely it is always our business to help anyone if we can, whatever he may have done. And in this case, we can help Soames. If he's sent away now, he may be absolutely ruined. You see, it's the second place he's had to leave without a character.
Do I understand you to consider that in his favor, Mr. Hilton?
No, but it gives him an added claim on our forbearance, doesn't it? Since it makes it more difficult for him to make a fresh start.
Then the more a servant disgraces himself, the more we are bound to help him. And if he only does it often enough, I suppose you'd pension him?
I will still try to help him, whatever he had done.
Rubbish.
Hush, Emily.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Hilton, but really this is quite preposterous. It's trying to regulate one's life by a theory instead of by the light of common sense.
Oh, it certainly is rather confusing, you must admit, Mr. Hilton.
I think my view is defensible even from the common sense standpoint, though it's not a standpoint I set much store by. What I want, what we all want, don't we, is to prevent Soames from sinking into destitution and so perhaps into crime.
Oh, I don't want him to do that, of course.
And the only way to prevent it is to get him some employment. Unhappily, he is probably unfitted for anything but domestic service. The only thing we to do, therefore, is to find him a place and give him a chance of retrieving his character. I would willingly engage him myself if I could, but my establishment has no place for a highly trained butler or indeed for a manservant at all. But If Lady Denison would keep him on...
Oh, no, I couldn't do that.
I should think not indeed.
Oh, it needn't be for long, say a year. If at the end of that time his work and his conduct generally have been satisfactory, Lady Denison can then send him away with a character, and he'll be able to get another place.
But I shan't want to send him away if his conduct is satisfactory.
Well, then why not try the experiment? Of course, I'm now putting this on the lowest grounds, the common sense grounds. Morally, it needs no defense. One should always forgive wrongdoing, shouldn't one?
Oh, I can't think that, Mr. Hilton. Wicked people must be punished. If they weren't, it would be so discouraging for good people.
No, wicked people are only weak people, Lady Denison. If they were strong, they would resist temptation. But they are weak, and they yield to it.
If Soames is unable to resist temptation of this kind, I think Muriel had certainly better discharge him on account of the other maids.
Well, I don't think he'll offend in this way again. He's had a lesson.
He had a lesson at the Mathesons.
And profited by it. He has been quite honest since he came to you, hasn't he, Lady Denison?
I believe so.
Oh, very well, then. The experiment answered in that case.
Oh, come, Mr. Hilton. We must be practical. Of course, this idea about being kind to unpleasant people and worthless people, and in fact to everybody one doesn't like and oughtn't to like, sounds very nice, but it's not practical.
Well, Lady Denison, it's for you to decide.
Oh, that's just it. I do so hate deciding things. If only I could ask Marjorie.
Certainly not.
It may save a soul.
You really think that? Oh, how very annoying. However, if that's so, I suppose you must stay.
Muriel!
Well, Emily, what can I do? If Mr. Hilton thinks so.
I do think so. Oh, thank you so much, Lady Denison. I'm sure you'll never regret it.
I'm quite sure she will. And I think it's very wrong of you, Mr. Hilton, to make my sister-in-law behave in this way. She doesn't like it.
You exaggerate my influence, Mrs. Eversley. It is Lady Denison's own goodness of heart that makes her want to help people. Without that, I should be powerless.
Ah, how nice of you to say that, Mr. Hilton. But you always say the right thing. I was really feeling dreadfully dispirited about all this, and you've driven it all away. There's nothing like tact, is there?
Enter General Bonsor.
Is that you, General? Have you been at the garden with Mrs. Horrocks?
I have not, Lady Denison.
Oh, no, to be sure. I forgot. I remember. Just so.
I've been in the rose garden smoking a cigar.
Oh, that's so kind of you. It's so good for the roses. Oh.
Where Mrs. Horrocks is, I have no idea. He exits.
Dear me, why did I say that? Of course, I oughtn't to have mentioned Mrs. Horrocks, but I'd forgotten all about their quarrel this morning. This affair of Soames quite put it out of my head. Now I suppose the General will be offended. Really, what with quarrels among one's visitors and scandal in the servants' hall, life is hardly worth living.
Mr. Hilton's system.
Shall I go and pacify the General?
If you would, Mr. Hilton. It really is scarcely safe to leave him alone just now, in case Mrs. Horrocks should come in.
Hilton exits.
It's been a very tiring morning, hasn't it, Emily?
Miss Trigg puts her head in.
I've been waiting for you nearly 20 minutes, Lady Denison. Is that declension ready now?
Oh, dear, I'm afraid not. I've really had no time to attend to it since you left me with Miss Triggs.
No time?
No, I'm so sorry. I was called away on urgent business. Most urgent business. And it's no good trying to do anything before luncheon now, is it? It will be ready in 2 or 3 minutes.
I'm afraid it is useless for me to attempt to teach you German, Lady Denison. If you're unwilling to give even the small amount of time I ask to studying it.
But really, Miss Triggs,
These are unnecessary. I am accustomed to be treated this way. It is the experience of all women, I believe, who earn their living by education.
I assure you,
You need not. I quite understand. We will abandon our lesson until later in the day, when you may have leisure to apply yourself to it.
She sweeps out.
Oh, now she's offended. Really, it's too bad.
Mr. Hilton's system.
I'd no idea people who taught German were so sensitive. I ought never to have said I would learn it.
You ought never to have asked Miss Triggs here at all, nor any of these people. Mrs. Horrocks, General Bomsaw, Mr. Vereker, they're all impossible.
I don't see what's the matter with Mr. Vereker. He's not been doing anything tiresome, has he?
Marjorie and Vereker appear on the terrace. Then Marjorie runs in excitedly by the window, holding Vereker by the hand.
Mother dear, is that you? I've got such a piece of news for you. What do you think? Hugh and I are engaged to be married.
You?
Mr. Vereker? He asked me to marry him down by the lake, and I said I would. Aren't you pleased?
Marjorie!
Really?
A gong rings loudly off.
Oh, there's luncheon going on, and my hands are simply piggy. We've been rubbing up ferns for my rockery. So are yours, Hugh. Run and wash them, dear. You must wait to be congratulated till afterwards.
All right.
Exit Vereker and Marjorie.
I must say.
I can't stop now, Aunt Emily, or we shall be late, and then the General will be furious.
And
Marjorie
you...
vexed.
And you said Marjorie was going to marry Mr. Hilton. Muriel, you must be a perfect fool.
I didn't, Emily. You said it.
Well, there's no use arguing about that now. You must put a stop to this engagement without a moment's delay.
Yes, I shall speak to Marjorie about it directly after luncheon. It's very naughty of her. I shall certainly refuse to sanction the engagement.
Better speak to her at once.
I think I'll wait till after luncheon.
Mr. Hilton again. If it weren't for him, Mr. Vereker would never have been invited to stay.
Yes, I really must give up going to hear Mr. Hilton. The results are too unpleasant. I don't mind asking the wrong people to the house and trying to make them happy, but I can't have them proposing to my daughter. I must make a stand against it all, now, at once, while I remember.
What are you going to do?
Dismiss Soames.
Curtain. All right, let us take a 5-minute intermission. All right. Act 3, scene the same. Time an hour later. Luncheon is just over. When the curtain rises, the stage is empty. Then enter Lady Denison, Mrs. Eversley, Mrs. Horrocks, Miss Triggs, Marjorie, General Bonsor, Hilton, and Vereker. It was at Jubilee it happened. We were up there after Pig. Travers was there, I remember, and Hindley on the 106. No, not Hindley. He died the year before. Bellairs, first class check. Bellairs. In the police. I'll tell you a story about him one day. He married Molly Henderson, daughter of Earl Henderson, the judge. Fat Henderson, we used to call him because he was so stout. Well, as I was saying, Travers and I were alone together.
Poor Travers.
What, sir?
Nothing.
Did I hear you remark, poor Travers?
I hope not, General. You were not intended to.
Did you remark it, sir?
I think you must have misunderstood Mr. Vereker, General.
Anyhow, the subject is scarcely worth pursuing, isn't it? And unless we are to be kept listening to the story the whole afternoon.
I had not intended to detain Mrs. Horrocks.
Don't you think we'd better all go out for a walk while the sunshine lasts? It's a pity not to make the most of it.
Marjorie,
Yes, Mother, in a moment. Miss Horrocks, you'll come, won't you?
Thank you. I shall be delighted.
Miss Triggs?
Miss Triggs nods.
General?
No, thank you. Enter William.
Mr. Hilton?
I'm afraid I must stay at home and finish my proofs.
Marjorie, I want to speak to you before... what is it, William? William?
The post, my lady. And could Mrs. Meredith speak to you a moment?
Oh, very well.
He exits.
That makes 3. Who else?
A letter for you, sir. Thank you. Excuse me.
Will you come, Aunt Emily?
No, thanks. I'm going to drive with your mother.
Very well. Hugh, 4. That'll be all.
You don't ask whether I want to come?
You've got to come, whether you like it or not, as a penance.
All right. If it's clearly understood that it's a penance, I'd rather like a walk.
Let's all go and get ready then. Come, Mrs. Horrocks, meet in the hall in 5 minutes.
They all exit. Mrs. Horrocks, Miss Triggs, Marjorie, and Vereker. Pause. Hilton has picked up a review and is glancing at one of the articles idly. General Bonsor is reading his letter.
This article in the Fortnightly on farm colonies is worth reading, Mrs. Eversley.
Thank you. I've had quite enough philanthropy lately without that.
Another pause. Mrs. Eversley takes up book and appears to read. Well...
Really, General Bonsor, these sudden exclamations are most disconcerting. Is anything the matter?
Mrs. Eversley, is Lady Denison aware of the character of that young man?
Of Mr. Hilton?
No, of that young man who just left the room. What's his name? Vereker.
I don't know. You'd better ask her.
I shall certainly do so. I venture to think she is not aware of it. I venture to think that when she has read what my old friend Nicholson, Toby Nicholson, says about him, she will scarcely consider him a fit person to invite to meet me.
I shouldn't build on that if I were you. My sister has peculiar views about hospitality.
Can you tell me where I shall find her?
She'll be back in a moment. I believe she only went to speak to the housekeeper. Oh, here she is.
Re-enter Lady Denison. Lady Denison.
Oh, Emily, the cook wants to leave now. She has found out about Anson and says she can't remain with me after the month. I told her Sam's was leaving, but she said... Oh, I beg your pardon, General. I thought Emily was alone.
General Bonsor has some news to communicate to you about Mr. Vereker. I needn't say of an unfavorable character.
Emily!
Perhaps I'd better.
On the contrary, Mr. Hilton had better remain. It's all his doing, as usual.
Mine?
Oh, never mind that now, Emily. But, General, if you have anything unpleasant to say, will you say it as quickly as possible, and then we shall get it over?
I will do so, Lady Denison. I have just received a letter from my friend Colonel Nicholson, who commands the Monster Regiment. Nicholson is an old friend of mine. I met him first in Poona in 72. What was it, 73?
Please do not bother about dates, General Bonsor. If you will kindly come to the point.
Certainly, Mrs. Eversley. I wrote to Colonel Nicholson a week ago, and I happened to hear, as Vereker say, that he had been in the Monsters. I mentioned that he was staying down there. The Monsters of the old 43rd, you know, the fighting 43rd. I remember them in the old days when Tom Ferguson was in command. Now, Ferguson and I...
General, would you mind leaving that part out and telling us what Colonel Nicholson said about Mr. Vereker? If he said anything, it's really important.
I was about to do so when you interrupted me, Lady Denison. I will do so now. Colonel Nicholson says... what the deuce does he say? I'll give it to you in his own words. I'm surprised to hear that you've got young Vereker standing with you. He means with you. of course. I thought the people fought rather shy of asking him. A small blame to them. He got into an ugly scrape while he was with us. Spent money belonging to the mess which he couldn't pay back. Might have gone to prison if the whole thing hadn't been hushed up. Had to send in his papers. Deuced ugly business altogether. Old Wackley, whom you remember, was a dum-dum, but that's all.
There, Mr. Hilton.
What is it, Mrs. Eversley? I'm really quite in the dark.
Hush, Emily, you forgot Mr. Hilton doesn't know yet. Nobody knows. General, would you mind leaving us with Mr. Hilton for a few minutes? My sister-in-law and I would like to consult him. We are very much obliged to you for letting us hear the letter. But would you please go at once?
Certainly.
Oh, Mr. Hilton, what is to be done? You heard what General Bonsoir said about Mr. Vereker just now? Mr. Vereker proposed to my daughter this morning, and she's accepted him.
Impossible.
I wish it were. Marjorie came and told us about it just before luncheon. Of course, I was most indignant and meant to tell her at once that I couldn't think of allowing it, but the luncheon gong rang, and I had no opportunity of speaking to her since. And it's all your fault, Mr. Hilton, as Emily says, for if it hadn't been for you, I shall never have asked Mr. Vereker to the house. I really knew nothing about him, and only did it out of kindness. And now the General tells us this.
Oh, Lady Denison, I can't say how distressed I am that this has occurred. I would have done anything to prevent it.
I'm glad to hear there are limits to even your toleration, Mr. Hilton.
Well, surely you never supposed I could approve of such a marriage.
I don't know. You champion Miss Triggs as a visitor and Soames as a butler. Why not Mr. Vereker as a son-in-law?
Oh, you can't really think of that, Mrs. Eversley. Knowing what I know about Vereker, how could I possibly think him a fit husband for a girl like Miss Denison?
Well, you don't think so. That's the main thing. The question is what is to be done.
Of course I shall forbid the engagement. I meant to do so before, but this puts it absolutely out of the question.
And Mr. Hilton must use his influence with Marjorie. It's the least he can do.
No, anything I can do, Mrs. Eversley, you may be quite sure will be done.
Let's hope she'll prove amenable for everybody's sake.
Oh, I've no fears on that score. When Miss Denison learns Vereker's true character, she won't wish to marry him any longer. It would be impossible.
Yes, wouldn't it? It's not as if Marjorie were an unprincipled girl or a bad girl in any way. She's a very good girl and a religious girl, and so she'll do what we tell her.
Oh, here is Miss Denison coming across the lawn with Vereker.
With Mr. Vereker? How unfortunate.
I don't see that it matters. He would have to be told what we think about him in any case. Why not now?
Very well. You must help me, Mr. Hilton. I'm so unaccustomed to having to manage Marjorie. She generally manages me.
Enter Marjorie, helping Vereker, who limps a little.
Is that you, Mother? Poor Hugh has sprained his ankle. Be careful of that step. Isn't it unfortunate? He slipped as we were going down the bank in the old Spiny. I sent the others on and brought him back by the short way across the lawn. Is it hurting much?
Oh, no, it's nothing.
Sit down here. And you must put your foot up and give it a complete rest. And if it's not better this evening, we'll send for Dr. Jenkins. Wasn't it lucky we hadn't got further from the house when it happened, Mother? It's so bad to walk with a sprain.
It's not a sprain, really, Marjorie. Just a twist, that's all.
Will you please not call my daughter Marjorie, Mr. Vereker?
Not call me Marjorie, but Mother, we're engaged.
You are not engaged, Marjorie. I cannot allow you to be engaged, at least not to Mr. Vereker.
Why not, Mother?
He knows quite well, and I think he's not behaved honorably in asking you to be engaged to him. When you know his true character, you will think so too.
You mean about his leaving the army?
Yes.
But I know about that.
I don't think you do, not all about it. You imagine, as I did, that he left the army because he had been foolish or got into debt or something. It was not that. Mr. Verker left the army for a far more serious reason that you know nothing about.
Oh, yes, I do, Mother dear. Hugh told me all about it this morning.
He told you?
Yes, before he asked me to marry him.
Really?
Marjorie, it's impossible. You never would have accepted him if he had told you. Mr. Verker is not a fit person for any girl to marry. He is dishonest.
Mother!
He spent money that didn't belong to him, money that had been entrusted to him.
I know. And when the time came, he couldn't pay it back. He told me all that quite fully before he proposed to me. I thought it was very honorable of him.
Honorable?
Yes. Wasn't it honorable? To tell me, I mean. He might have said nothing about it, or at least concealed the worst part, hoping we should never find out. But he didn't. He told me everything. I think that was partially what made me say yes.
Marjorie, you must be out of your senses.
Why? It's all over now. Quite over and done with. What is past is past. It happened 4 years ago. Surely we might forget it now?
No, Marjorie. A thing like this can never be forgotten.
I can't think that. One should always forgive wrongdoing, shouldn't one? And if one forgives, why not forget?
Rubbish.
Mr. Verker, I must speak very seriously to my daughter about this, but there's no need for you to stay if you'd rather not. It would only be painful for you to hear. Would you rather leave for a little?
Thank you, Lady Denison. I don't mind.
He settles himself on the sofa. A pause.
Mother, aren't you all being rather hard on poor Hugh? We all do things we're ashamed of sometimes. Not quite the same things as this, perhaps, but still wrong things. And if we're sorry and try not to do them again, oughtn't that to be enough?
No.
I'm sure Mr. Hilton thinks so.
No, Miss Denison. In this matter, I agree with Mrs. Eversley.
Mr. Hilton?
Your mother has told you what she wishes. I think you should obey her. It is your duty.
Of course one should obey one's parents, I know. But there are other duties as well.
Miss Denison, I've no right to speak to you about this or to urge you in any way. If you resent it, I cannot complain. But the friendship I feel for you and your mother, the kindness you have always shown me, makes me risk that. Break off this engagement. Break it off, I beg of you. It is impossible that a girl like you should be happy with such a man as Mr. Verker.
But one shouldn't only think of happiness when one marries, should one?
What do you mean?
I mean, there are other things. One would like to be happy, of course, but other things are more important. Helping people, for instance.
Are you going to marry Mr. Verker because you want to help him?
Of course. This morning, when Mr. Hilton and I were talking about Hugh, he said there was so much that was good in him that only needed bringing out, that the eyes of his soul had not been opened yet, and said that if he fell into good hands, he would be all right. If he fell into bad hands, he might go on being careless and indifferent always. So I thought if he married me, I might prevent him from falling into bad hands.
But when I was talking to you about Mr. Verker this morning, I never dreamed of you marrying him.
Nor did I then. But afterwards, when he asked me, I remembered. And so I said yes. I'm sure I did right.
Miss Denison, this is terrible. I assure you what you are doing is not right, but wrong. It is quite right that you should want to help Mr. Verker, of course, but it is not right that you should marry him.
But perhaps it is only by marrying Hugh that I can help him. You see, it's not easy for a girl to help a man, however much she may wish to. They see so little of each other. And if you're really to influence people, you must be with them, mustn't you? But when people are married, they are always together. And then it's easy. So I'm sure I'm doing right in marrying you. When a girl marries, she should choose someone she can do good to, someone who needs her. I always been a very good man. Hugh does not... Okay, hold on. Now I think perhaps Hugh does need me, for he's not always been a very good man so far. He's been lazy and rather selfish and not very thoughtful for others. I'm going to cure him of all that. Am I not, Hugh?
If you can, Marjorie.
And that's really worth doing, isn't it? You see, if I married a good man, like you, Mr. Hilton, I couldn't help him at all. He'd be quite good already, but Hugh has done foolish things and wrong things, as we know. I can help him.
Marjorie, I think you ought to listen to what Mr. Hilton says, and what I say, and do what we ask. It's very wrong of you to be so obstinate. You know we're thinking only of your good.
Yes, but are you thinking of Hugh's good, Mother?
What does she mean?
Would it help him if I broke it off?
Who ever heard of marrying a man to help him?
Why not, Aunt Emily? Mr. Hilton always says the only real way of helping people is to love them. And if one loves people, of course, one should marry them.
Loves them. So that's it, is it? You're not marrying Mr. Vereker because you want to help him, but because you've fallen in love with him. And you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Of course I love Hugh. What is there to be ashamed of in that?
Is there nothing to be ashamed of in wanting to marry a worthless man, knowing him to be worthless? You have heard of men marrying worthless women, I suppose. Nobody thinks they're performing a moral duty and setting an example to their fellows. On the contrary, we think them weak or vicious. What you are doing is exactly what they do, only they have the grace not to talk morality about it.
I don't expect you to understand, Aunt Emily. You never do like the way Mother and I look at things, do you?
Oh, don't bring me into this, please.
Very well, Mother. But I did think you would be on my side. And Mr. Hilton, I love Hugh, and I want to help him. There's nothing strange in that, is there? When one wants to help people, one always does get to love them. That's the splendid thing about helping people.
Well, there's no use arguing with Marjorie while she's like this. She evidently has no moral sense whatever.
Mr. Vereker, I appeal to you. You see what Marjorie is doing. Release her from this engagement. She is merely sacrificing herself from a fantastic sense of duty.
Surely not. If so, I have gravely misunderstood Mrs. Eversley. I thought it was Marjorie's fantastic sense of affection she admitted.
You, dear.
If you are going to insult me, Mr. Vereker.
I really beg your pardon. Perhaps I oughtn't have said that, but some not very pleasant things have been said about me, haven't they?
And with reason. A man of your antecedents has no right to propose to the daughter of the house in which he stays. It is taking advantage of her inexperience. It is dishonorable.
Is that so? Then I'm probably rather lacking in the finer sense about these things. But I suppose everyone is inclined to find excuses for his own misdeeds while remaining inflexibly severe towards his neighbors. That's the foundation of all morality, isn't it, Hilton?
I should have thought stealing.
Yes, stealing's an ugly word, isn't it? It makes even me uncomfortable. And yet if you understood the whole circumstances, you might take a more lenient view. But that, of course, would be a very bad thing for morality. So no doubt you'd rather not.
Lady Denison, if Mr. Vereker has anything to tell you that will put a more favorable light on the General's story...
General's? So he told you?
He heard it from Colonel Nicholson, who commands your old regiment.
Ah, yes, I remember. He said he was writing to him. Poor General. So he really has been able to finish a story for once.
I was going to say that it would be only fair to give Mr. Vereker every chance of defending himself.
Oh, I don't think it amounts to a defense. Merely a statement of the case from the person who knows most about it. The criminal, as Mrs. Eversley would say. I was an extravagant young fool. The regiment was an expensive one. I had a small allowance. I had lost money over cards and other things to richer men than I was, who, by the way, ought never to have played with me at all. Like an idiot, I thought I must pay my debts to them, whatever happened. You know the nonsense that is talked about, a debt of honor. To do that, I used money belonging to the mess, which happened to be in my hands. Of course, I hoped to pay it back at once, or I shouldn't have done it. Equally, of course, I failed to do so. A horse that was simply bound to win lost, and I played cards for a whole week and never held a trump, the usual thing. When things were pretty desperate, I cabled to Uncle Montague. I was in India at the time, asking him to send me £100 by return. Of course, I lied to him about the reason. Everybody does lie, I suppose, about that sort of reason. I said I owed it to tailors and people I remember. Naturally, Uncle Mont didn't see the force of sending me £100 without haggling about it. Uncles always do haggle about money, I believe. At least mine. So Uncle Mont haggled, and like a young ass, instead of going straight to the colonel or the moneylenders, I faked the accounts. It was purely a temporary expedient. I knew the money would turn up in a week or two. It was merely a question of gaining time. But as luck would have it, someone with an elementary knowledge of arithmetic happened to glance at the accounts. He spotted something was wrong and told the others, and instead of coming to me, they went to the colonel. The colonel sent for me, and there was no end of a row. I tried to make him understand, but he couldn't. The stupidity of military men has been proverbial in all ages. I'm a bit of a fool myself, as you will have noticed. He stormed, and I was sulky. My borrowing the money, intending to repay it, he could just understand, but faking the accounts to conceal the fact was beyond him, though it was the logical consequence of the other if the thing was to be kept dark. When the fat was in the fire, Uncle Mont's check turned up, but by that time we'd all lost our tempers. The colonel was prancing around about the honor of the regiment, and I had to send in my papers.
Poor fellow.
Huh?
Nothing.
Mr. Hilton, I knew you'd understand. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Vereker, you've made out a very clever case, and you've put it very glibly. It must have taken you some time to prepare.
Just 4 years, Mrs. Eversley. It happened 4 years ago, and I've not had much else to think of since. It was a confoundedly silly thing to do, as I said, and I've been wondering ever since how I came to do it. The result of my consideration is the story I've told you. I don't ask you to believe it, of course, but it's quite true.
I believe it, Vereker, and I am more sorry for you than I can say. If I've said anything that was harsh or unjustifiable, please forgive me.
Not at all, my dear fellow.
It's all dreadfully sad, Mr. Vereker. I see that. But still, it doesn't alter the facts, does it? You have had to leave the army. Your reputation is ruined. And that makes you not a fit husband for Marjorie.
I feel that, Lady Denison.
You?
Then why did you propose to her?
A sudden impulse, I suppose. That's how most people propose, isn't it? If they stop to think, they think better of it, and then no one would ever marry at all, which would perhaps be the wisest plan for all parties.
Still, in your case, you must admit there were special circumstances.
I don't know. How many men are fit husbands for the girls they marry? 1 in 100? 1 in 1,000? Girls are so ridiculously innocent, and men are so ridiculously depraved. I'm not so very much worse than the others, only I was stupider, and that ruined me. But it was 4 years ago, and I'm not likely to do it again. A man doesn't play the fool like that twice. One pays too dear for it. Considered as a husband, I'm probably the better for the experience. I've learned by it.
Mr. Vereker, what you say is quite true, and I dare say you're not really worse than many men, though the world judges things like this more hardly than other things. But we are in the world, and we must accept its judgment as we cannot alter it. If you marry Marjorie, she will have to suffer for what you have done. I don't think you want her to do that. Be generous and release her from her promise.
My dear Lady Denison, I put myself entirely in Marjorie's hands. If she wishes to end our engagement, she is absolutely free to do so. I assert no claim over her whatever. I agree with you that she would only be acting wisely to break it off, and I shan't dream of blaming her if she does. But you mustn't ask me to break it off. A man can't do that. But if Marjorie wants her freedom, she has only to speak.
That's fine of you, Verica. That's noble on my soul. You really are a good fellow. I know what it must cost you to give up a girl like Miss Denison. I honor you for it.
Thanks, dear chap. But you mustn't be too precipitate. I haven't given her up yet. Marjorie hasn't spoken.
Marjorie, dear, you will break it off?
No, Mother. As long as Hugh wants me, I shall stand by him.
Then you don't love your mother.
Marjorie runs impulsively to her mother and kisses her.
Of course I love you, Mother dear, but I love Hugh too.
Well, I suppose there's no more to be said. If Marjorie is determined to ruin herself, nobody can prevent her. You, of course, will continue to forbid the engagement, Muriel, but Marjorie is of age, and if she chooses to defy you and marry this Mr. Verica, she can do so. But in that case, I hope you will entirely refuse to make her any allowance, and in fact will disinherit her.
What nonsense, Emily. Of course Marjorie must have an allowance. What else will she live on? Especially as I suppose Mr. Verica has nothing.
Next to nothing.
Very well, then. Naturally, I shall have to help them. And as for disinheriting her, that's impossible, even if it were just, as I've no other children. No, Marjorie must be provided for in any case. I'm sorry she is unwilling to do as I wish, and I think this engagement terribly unwise and unsuitable. But I suppose she's very fond of Hugh, just as I was very fond of Charlie before I married him. And so she must do as she likes.
Mrs. Eversley gives up the struggle in despair and opens her book again with a shrug.
Darling Mother.
Embracing.
Now you're being like yourself again instead of being like Aunt Emily, which doesn't suit you one bit. I always knew you'd agree with me, really. And Mr. Hilton, though you took rather longer than I expected. Hugh, give Mother a kiss, like a dutiful son-in-law, and say you think her the best woman in the world.
I think I'll spare poor Lady Denison that. She's had a great deal to put up with during the past hour.
Poor Mother. I suppose she has.
I hope, however, later on she'll get more reconciled to things. She can't really dislike me as much as she thinks. Otherwise, she wouldn't have asked me here.
Mrs. Eversley closes her book deliberately with a smile of malicious satisfaction.
I'm afraid I really must disabuse you of that idea, Mr. Verica. My sister-in-law has curious views of hospitality. She doesn't ask people to her house because she likes them or thinks them pleasant acquaintances, but because they are disagreeable or disreputable or haven't anywhere else to go. It's a new form of philanthropy. Mr. Hilton invented it. You seem amused.
I am. How delicious. So that's why I was invited, because I was down on my luck and wasn't asked to many houses. And I thought it was because of my delightful society.
You were certainly strangely mistaken.
So it seems. And that explains why all these other people are here, I suppose. I thought they were rather a darnaged lot. Oh, Bonsall, Miss Triggs, Ferget, that appalling Mrs. Horrocks, Hilton, who's an excellent chap, but quite mad. And you too, I dare say, Mrs. Eversley.
I, sir? Certainly not. I am here because I am Lady Denison's sister-in-law.
Now, that's no reason. Lots of people hate their sisters-in-law. I know I simply loathe my brothers.
I am glad to think that Lady Denison is unlike you in that, as in every respect.
Of course, Emily. I asked you because I'd like to have you here. And Mr. Hilton, too. I must invite the people I like occasionally.
I see. Well, Lady Denison, I think it's a splendid idea of yours, far more amusing than the ordinary way of inviting people. And the more dreadful they are, the more amusing it must be. Marjorie and I must certainly take to it when we have a house.
I don't see anything amusing in it, Mr. Verica. In fact, it's often extremely unpleasant and leads to most regrettable complications.
Such as my getting engaged to Marjorie?
That, among other things.
Do none of them know?
No.
Why not? They'd be awfully amused.
General is heard approaching window humming a song.
Oh, by Jove, here is the General. I must tell him.
Please, please.
Oh, yes, I must. I owe him one for telling you all about me. You owe him one, too. He's given you a most uncomfortable afternoon.
Enter General. Isn't it tea time, Lady Denison? I think so.
Long past. I say, General, why have you been telling tales about me to Lady Denison?
If it comes to my knowledge, sir, that a man who is staying in a lady's house with me is not a person whom other people wish to meet, I make it a rule to inform my hostess of the fact.
And a very good rule, too. Only Lady Denison doesn't ask people to her house whom other people wish to meet. It's against her principles.
Mr. Vereker.
Upon my word, sir. Miss Horrocks and Miss Triggs enter unnoticed and stand listening.
Lady Denison selects her visitors on philanthropic grounds because they're disagreeable or disreputable or merely boring. It's a form of self-denial with her. That's why she asked you. That's why she asked me. That's why she asked all of us.
What?
What?
Good heavens, Mrs. Horrocks.
Yes, sir. Mrs. Horrocks. Miss Triggs and I returned from our walk just in time to hear your extraordinary statement. May I ask what truth, if any, it contains?
Really, Mrs. Horrocks, I'm very sorry. You should have heard what I said.
Is it true, sir? Lady Denison, perhaps you will inform me.
Why was I invited here, Lady Denison?
Well, I never meant for you to know. I never meant for Mr. Vereker to know. It's all very unfortunate. Please accept my apologies, all of you. I'm most distressed this should have happened.
And it is true.
Well, I don't think Mr. Vereker should have told the General. It was most inconsiderate of him. But I hope you won't hold me responsible.
Of course, you will not expect me to remain.
Nor me. Boring.
Oh, need you all go like that? After all, there's nothing so very dreadful in what you've heard. It was Mr. Hilton's idea. Oh, he meant it kindly. We all meant it kindly.
Lady Denison, if you cannot understand how insulting this is to me, I cannot make you do so. But I should have thought, considering my birth and connections, I might have claimed a somewhat different treatment. The carriage, please, or the 6 o'clock train.
And will you please send some tea to my room? I shall not come down again before I leave.
Boring. Exits.
This, Muriel, is what comes of beginning one's charity at home.
Curtain. End of Act 3. Beginning of Act 4. The dining room at Friars Ashton. A week has passed since Act 3. There is a round dining table about which are sitting at dessert Lady Denison, Vereker, Marjorie, Hilton, and Mrs. Eversley. When curtain rises, William is handing fruit.
Grapes, madam?
What fine grapes you have this year, Muriel.
William hands to the others.
Aren't they? I took some to old Biddy Porter today. She's been ill.
Who is old Biddy Porter?
She lives at Ashton Parva, in one of those little houses before you get to the church. She's had influenza, so I thought it would be nice to take her some grapes. She was so pleased.
The gardener wasn't.
No, poor Thompson. He's so funny about the fruit. He seems to think we grow it entirely for ourselves. He's quite angry when I give any of it away. He doesn't even like my sending any to the cottage hospital.
Oh, you will be careful with Thompson, won't you, Marjorie? He's so easily offended. I remember last year when you took all the early peaches to the workhouse infirmary just before we were giving some dinner parties, he nearly gave warning. And I don't want to lose him. He's such an excellent gardener.
William, having finished his duties, goes out.
The new butler hasn't come yet?
No, we expect him tomorrow. I do hope he'll be a success. He has the highest references.
Oh, that must be very distressing to Mr. Hilton.
Emily, you're not to scratch at Mr. Hilton. He's been working at proofs all day, and now he wants a rest.
Lucky chap.
What do you mean?
To have you prescribing rest for him. You don't prescribe much rest for me.
Has Marjorie been working you very hard, Hugh?
Of course not, Mother. Hugh's only talking nonsense.
Am I? Oh, just you listen. This morning, I left some soup with Mrs. Green while Marjorie was taking Biddy Porter her grapes. She stopped the carriage at Mrs. Green's and dropped me there. It was nearly half an hour before she came back for me, and I had to hear the history of every disease from which the old lady had ever suffered, and to look at her bad leg.
Really, Mr. Vereker?
Amen. I know it was some part of a poor old body, though I couldn't recognize it. It was quite disgusting. I should have gone away, only Mrs. Green lives 4 miles from here, and I hate walking when it's hot. However, the carriage came back at last, and then we drove on to the church, which Marjorie is decorating for some reason or other. I think because the harvest has failed. There I sat in a pew and made a wreath of mangelwurzels to adorn the font.
Not mangelwurzels.
Well, some kind of vegetable. We got back to lunch at last, late of course. The wreath took so long, and in the afternoon, after a brief interval of repose, I wrote letters on behalf of a certain Mary Gainage who wants to get into an orphanage at Basingstoke, which seems an odd taste. I wrote 25 of them.
Only after you'd been coaxed for a whole quarter of an hour. You were quite cross about it and said you weren't a galley slave.
Well, I was wrong.
You were very disagreeable.
I know. I hoped we were going to quarrel, but you wouldn't. That's the worst of Marjorie. She never will quarrel.
It's a good fault.
Is it? However, I wrote 25 letters on behalf of Mary Gainage, as I said, and I've got 75 still to do. They were to ask subscribers to the orphanage for their votes. I gather some 500 other people are busily engaged in writing the same number of letters on behalf of their orphans, and the subscribers in common politeness will have to write to the whole 500 of us to say they have given their votes to the 501st. They can only vote once. The mere expenditure in postage stamps would suffice to endow another orphanage, not to speak of the waste of my time and theirs. Moreover, I'm given to understand that this ritual is gone through every time the orphanage has a vacancy, and that there are more than 100 orphanages similarly conducted in this distracted country. Who ever heard of such tomfoolery?
It is troublesome, of course, but I don't see how else you could settle whom to let in. There are so many orphans.
You could put the names in a hat, shake it, and take the one that fell out first.
But would people subscribe to orphanages if they didn't get a vote?
What on earth do they want votes for?
In order that their orphans may get in instead of the others.
Another illusion gone. I used to think charitable people gave their money because they were genuinely anxious to do good. I now find, on the highest authority, that they do it to keep out each other's orphans. Marjorie, I won't write another letter.
Oh, Hugh, how horrid of you. If you don't, I shall have to do them, and you said you would.
Oh, very well, I suppose I must, as I said so, but my faith in charity is shattered. Nothing survives a closer acquaintance, not even orphanages.
How absurd you are, Hugh. You know you only talk like that because you think it will shock us, and it doesn't shock us one bit. We only think it's silly.
As you please, dear. But if that's the only way in which orphans can be kept alive, I think you'd better drown them And I've been an orphan myself.
Oh, do you mind talking about something else for a moment, Hugh? I think I hear William with the coffee, and he mightn't like it.
William enters and hands out coffee.
Well, did you get as far as Croom this afternoon, Mrs. Eversley?
Yes, poor Lady Seathwaite is still in bed. But the doctor says she may be able to come down on Monday.
What's the matter with Lady Seathwaite?
Oh, she has a bad attack of gout. She has it every autumn.
I see. Overeats herself.
Mr. Vereker, will you kindly remember that Lady Seathwaite is a friend of mine, and that I do not care to hear her insulted?
I've no intention of insulting her, Mrs. Eversley. It was only a suggestion to account for her indisposition.
A most uncalled for suggestion.
Very well, I withdraw it. I dare say she eats too little and suffers from poverty of the blood. Marjorie shall drive me over tomorrow afternoon and will ask her which it is.
Hugh, you're not to laugh at Aunt Emily. She doesn't like it. And we can't possibly go over tomorrow afternoon because you're coming with me to the tea at the vicarage.
Oh, let's skip the tea.
Certainly not. The Willises would be dreadfully hurt if we didn't go, and it's so unkind to disappoint people.
The electric light suddenly goes out, leaving only the candles on the table alight.
Good heavens, what's that?
Only the electric light, Emily.
Only the electric light?
Oh, it does happen sometimes. You see, Bassett, who looks after the dynamo, isn't really an electrician. He was a footman.
Then why does he look after the dynamo?
Well, he was out of a place.
Muriel.
Well, what's the matter now, Emily? Nothing else has happened, has it? He was out of a place, as I said. He had been second footman at the Fox Wilkinsons at Abbott's Ashton, but I'm afraid he sometimes took more to drink than was good for him. At last, he was found one day after luncheon in the dining room quite intoxicated, so they had to send him away. When Marjorie heard of it, she wanted to have him here, under Soames, but Soames didn't like the idea. In fact, he was quite indignant about it. So the electric light was being put in just then, and Marjorie said Bassett could be taught to look after the engine. But he's not very skillful as yet, so the light sometimes goes out for hours at a time. I hope it isn't going to tonight.
The light comes on again. Goes out, comes on, finally remains steady.
Ah, that's better. Oh, now it's gone again. Ah, that's right.
I thought you had given up engaging your servants on altruistic principles, Muriel.
So I have, but I couldn't send Bassett away, could I? I don't think he could get another place. And besides, he's really wonderfully improved. He hardly ever takes too much now. Shall we go?
Lady Denison, Mrs. Eversley, and Marjorie go out, Hilton holding the open door. Vereker strolls to the fireplace and leans against the mantelpiece, stretches himself. Hilton moves to Lady Denison's seat.
Lady Denison is the most absurd person in the world.
Is she?
Yes. But good people always are more or less absurd, aren't they?
Well, the children of this world are wiser than the children of light, certainly.
Exactly. And she'll never learn wisdom now, poor lady. She's listened to you too long. She'll never get the poison out of her system.
Oh, she dismissed Soames?
Yes, but keeps Bassett. You've won, after all. Cigar?
Thanks.
Oh, poor Mrs. Eversley. How she loathes me. She'll never forgive me for having proposed to Marjorie.
It doesn't matter. You've Lady Denison on your side.
Thanks to you.
Oh, I don't think I'd much to do with it.
I know better. If it hadn't been for you, Lady Denison would still be unreconciled. I've no illusions on that point.
Oh, Miss Denison would have made your peace for you.
Yes, Marjorie has been a brick all through. She always would be. But you backed her up. I wonder why. Why was it?
Well, perhaps I felt I owed you some amends for the way I behaved when I first heard of your engagement.
I don't know. Your attitude was a perfectly reasonable one. It was the most ridiculous engagement for Marjorie. Is, in fact.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I am a young man with a discreditable past and no future. Marjorie will have a good deal of money one day. Considered as a match for her, it's preposterous.
Well, I wasn't thinking of money.
You never are, my dear fellow.
Besides, you won't be able to squander Miss Denison's money even if you want to. It's all to be tied up strictly in trust.
Yes, I shall be like a dog with a biscuit perpetually on his nose and nobody ever saying, paid for.
Well, something like that.
However, I didn't propose to Marjorie for her money, so I don't know that that matters.
Oh, of course not. You proposed to her because you loved her, because you couldn't help seeing how good and unselfish and noble she is. But no one could help loving Miss Denison. She has all the sweet and lovable qualities. She is the most wonderfully good woman I've ever known.
Yes, it's a great pity.
Well, what do you mean?
People really ought to have some redeeming vices, don't you think? But Marjorie's quite impeccable, poor dear. I remember I spoke to her about it before I ever thought of proposing to her.
Oh, scoffer.
Not at all. Marjorie's simply riddled with philanthropy and unselfishness and the devil knows what. I call it morbid. I don't believe she ever thinks of herself at all. I've never known anyone like her before. I don't believe there is anyone like her.
Well, Miss Denison has a curiously perfect character.
That's what worries me.
Oh.
It's all very well for you, Hilton. You've not got to live up to it. And if you had, I dare say you wouldn't mind. You're a bit of a saint yourself. But for a healthy, easygoing mortal like me, it's rather alarming.
You'll get used to it.
You think so?
Yes, with Miss Denison's help. Oh, why, she's helped you already more than you realize. You're a different man from what you were a week ago.
I know. That's what's so annoying. Fancy me distributing soup to old ladies and soliciting votes for a blighted orphan. It's simply disgusting.
Nonsense, my dear fellow. You like it really, you know.
Oh, I beg your pardon. My whole soul, I think that's what you call it, revolts against it. But I do it. That's the miracle. And I did think the age of miracles was past.
Ah, the age of miracles will never pass while there are men and women like Miss Denison in the world.
You're a queer chap, Hilton.
Why?
Nothing.
Yes, faith can move mountains, now as always. And Miss Denison has faith. Faith in goodness and in truth and in self-surrender. She'll convert you yet.
No.
Oh, she will. You laugh at altruism now. In a year, you'll be an altruist yourself. And it's your marriage that will have done it.
So that's why you approve of this absurd marriage?
Yes. It's to save a soul.
More philanthropy.
More philanthropy. This marriage is going to be the making of you. It will help you to find yourself, your true self.
I should have thought I'd manage that.
Oh, you're wrong. Your real self is not the healthy, easygoing person you talk of. It's the strong, self-restrained, self-denying man Miss Denison will put in his place. There's nothing the love of a really good woman can't do for a man. It brings out all that is fine in his nature and drives out all that is base. That is what your marriage will do for you.
The deuce it will.
But I must apologize for talking to you like this. I'm afraid it bores you.
Not a bit. I like it.
No.
Yes, I do. In fact, I'm rather interested in the psychology of benevolence just now. Please, go on.
Well, not tonight. Besides, we ought to be moving.
Perhaps so. Will Marjorie always be as good as she is now, do you suppose?
Oh, I'll stake my life on it.
No chance of her outgrowing it?
None.
I hoped she might. Well, Hilton, I'm glad to have had this chat with you. You really are a good chap, you know. And if you can go on being friends with a sweep like me, I shall be grateful.
I think I shall manage that.
I'm not so sure.
Marjorie.
You rude people. You've stayed much too long over your cigars. How is it poor William to clear away?
Can't he do that tomorrow morning?
That shows how much you know about managing a household.
We were just coming, Miss Denison.
You're too late now. Mother's gone to bed. She's tired. And Aunt Emily's going too. She's cross. And so am I. I'm offended.
Stay 5 minutes. Sit down here.
No.
Yes.
He puts her gently in his own chair. He sits on an arm of the armchair.
And give me a cigarette.
You smoke any more?
No, but I will.
He does so.
I've been getting some more letters done for Mary Gamage.
That infernal orphan?
Hush! So you won't have quite 75 more to write.
Oh, thank heaven.
I think you might get up and do a few before breakfast tomorrow, just to show your gratitude. I'll help. I should like to get them off before we go to the vicarage.
Marjorie, I refuse.
Very well, but you're very foolish. Before breakfast is the nicest part of the day at this time of year. You lazy people who don't come down till 9:30 don't know what you're missing.
We'll take your word for it.
Will you come to tea at Mackworth's this Friday, Mr. Hilton?
Oh, certainly, if you like.
You must come too, Hugh.
All right. Who are the Mackworths?
They live in a funny little house in the village. Old Miss Mackworth's very deaf, and he can't hear much either, so they don't have many visitors. It's so tiring talking to deaf people, isn't it? One has to shout so, but I always try to go at least once when we're down here. It cheers them up, I think. I'm glad you're both coming. And now I really must go to bed. Good night.
No, stop a bit longer.
Can't.
Yes, you can. Just till I finish this. Besides, I've something rather particular to say to you.
Well, in that case, perhaps I'd better retire to the library.
Do. I'll be with you in 2 minutes.
Hilton exits.
Well, what is this important thing you've got to say to me?
I'll tell you. By Jove, you are pretty, Marjorie.
I don't think that's very important.
Then you're very much mistaken. However, that's not what I had to say. Marjorie, I want you to break off our engagement.
You?
My dear, I don't like saying it, and I hope you don't like hearing it, though I don't want it to hurt you too much either. But I've been thinking things over, and I'm quite sure we two oughtn't to marry.
Why not?
Oh, for lots of reasons. I'm not good enough for you, Marjorie, and that's the long and short of it.
What nonsense!
It's not nonsense at all, unfortunately. It's a painful truth. Mrs. Eversley was right. I ought never to have proposed to you.
Do you mean you don't love me, Hugh, as you thought you did?
No, I don't mean that. I love you as much as ever. More, perhaps, now that I'm going to lose you. But on every ground except love, I'm quite unfit to marry you.
Surely love is enough?
No, it isn't. Marjorie, let's face facts and not shirk them as everyone else seems to do. Marriage isn't a thing to be romantic about. It lasts too long.
You?
My dear, it may last 40 years. Surely that's long enough in all conscience. Very well then. As one marries for a long time, one should choose carefully, reasonably. One mustn't be carried away by passion. Passion's a great thing in marriage, but common sense is greater. Now, what sort of a life should we make of it together if we married, you and I? Why, my dear, we've not an idea or a taste in common. Everything you say makes me laugh, and almost everything I think would make you blush. It's simply absurd for a girl like you to marry a fellow like me. Let's say so frankly and end it.
But, Hugh, you liked being engaged to me at first, didn't you? Why have you changed your mind? Have I done anything?
No, dear. You've been absolutely sweet and good as you always would be. Only you're too good, and that's all about it.
Now you're laughing at me.
I never was further from laughter in my life. I say you're too good, and I mean it. You look on life as a moral discipline. I look on it as a means to enjoyment. You think only of doing what you imagine to be right. I think only of getting what I know to be pleasant. They call it incompatibility of temper in the law courts, I believe.
I don't understand you, Hugh. Sometimes you seem quite serious, and then you say something hard that spoils it all.
I know, dear. You don't understand me, and it's just as well you don't. But that makes the idea of marriage between us rather ridiculous, doesn't it? The sort of man you ought to marry is Hilton, who, by the way, is over head and ears in love with you. You should have heard his eulogies over you 10 minutes ago. He was simply lyrical. Yes, yes, you must marry Hilton, will you?
I am still engaged to you, dear, so far.
I'll release you, and you really will be happy with Hilton. He's a first-rate chap. Promise me that when you've stopped mourning for me, say in about a fortnight's time, you'll seriously consider the possibilities of Hilton.
Are you really heartless, Hugh, or do you only pretend to be?
I don't know. Ask Hilton.
I thought we'd be so happy together since we've been engaged.
No, we have, dear, in spite of marriage age. But then we've only been engaged a week, and I feel years older for it.
Seriously, Hugh?
I'm serious enough. You think everybody can be as self-denying as you are, Marjorie? You're wrong. Some people are born self-denying, just as other people are born self-indulgent. I belong to the latter variety.
But you may change.
Oh, men don't change, Marjorie. They repent, but they don't reform. And so our engagement has been a mistake. It's my fault, I know. I ought to have thought of all of this before I asked you to marry me, but you were so pretty and, well, I didn't. Will you forgive me?
Of course I forgive you, Hugh. It's not your fault. You thought you loved me and you asked me to marry you. Now you find you don't and you ask me to release you. You've been quite kind and straightforward. There's nothing to forgive.
My dear, it's not that. I loved you before. I love you still. I believe I shall always love you, so long as I don't marry you. But married, we should be miserable.
I don't think I should be miserable.
I know I should. At first, I should be as unselfish as the deuce just to oblige you. But after a bit, I shouldn't be able to stand it, and I should strike. And then you'd be disappointed, and I should be disagreeable, and our marriage would become a tragedy. I don't want that to happen. I'd rather you found me out now, while you're still fond of me, than later, when you've come to hate me.
I should never hate you, Hugh.
You couldn't help yourself, my dear. An unhappy marriage would demoralize even you. They say some forms of suffering ennoble people, and putting up with that, with what one doesn't like, is supposed to be good for the character, though I'm sure I don't know why. But an unhappy marriage never ennobled a man or a woman. It makes them peevish and unreasonable. It sours their tempers and ruins their digestions. My parents didn't get on together, and I know. If the parsons cared 2 straws about morality instead of thinking only of their dogmas, they'd make divorcing one's wife as easy as dismissing one's cook. Easier.
You!
They would. When married people don't hit it off, they jar. There's no middle course. And when the jarring has gone on for a certain length of time, it gets past bearing. Human nerves won't stand it. Nothing will enable them to stand it. Not love, nor religion, nor all the 7 deadly virtues. Socrates was a good man, but he made his wife pretty unhappy.
And you think I should make you unhappy?
I am sure of it. So let's behave accordingly. Come, Marjorie. Say you release me and get it over.
Very well. If you really wish it. You're sure you do wish it?
Quite. Thanks, dear. You've behaved like a trump, as you always do. And I think I must kiss you goodbye. Don't say anything to the others till after I've left. I rather dread Mrs. Eversley's unconcealed satisfaction. I shall go tomorrow.
Very well. If you'd rather not.
I'm afraid you think I've been a selfish beast about this.
A little selfish, perhaps.
You're wrong. For the first, and I hope the last time in my life, I've done an unselfish action. I'm a pauper, you know, and you're something of an heiress. And I've given you up without compensation. It's rather to my credit.
Only because you wouldn't be happy.
No, because you wouldn't be happy. I should have been all right, but I had to put it the other way or you wouldn't have let me go. I should have given up philanthropy after the first 6 weeks and had no end of a good time. But you'd have been wretched. We've done the right thing. And you won't forget about Hilton, will you? Shall we go in?
He goes and opens the door for her. They go out as the curtain falls. End of play. Very good, everyone. That was wonderful.
Yay! Bravo, everyone!
Thank you.